If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, as always, Chris McDaniel, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
Jason Rosenbaum of the St. Louis Beacon.
And
Joe Manis with the St. Louis Beacon, back from Denver.
And State Senator
Scott Rupp from St. Charles County.
Senator, thank you very much for joining us. Why don't we have you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you got into politics, and what you've been up to this session?
Sure, no problem. Live in Wentzville. Got a great wife, 5 kids. Got lucky enough to have great parents that just raised me.
5 kids is a lot of kids.
Yes, I was the youngest of 5 myself. And so just early on, they just kind of instilled in that public service and giving back. And I was elected to the Missouri House in 2002. I got into politics because a family friend was a judge when I was a kid, and I loved stapling the signs and going to the parades and passing out candy. And then when I got into high school, I had a great teacher that taught a college credit course on political science, taught all ideologies, taught, everything from communism to fascism to conservatism, and learned that there's 7 answers to one question depending on what your ideology is. Went to Mizzou, got involved in college Republicans, volunteering on campaigns, came back, started 3 small businesses, had the house with the picket fence and baby on the way, and thought now's the time to get in and reach a dream, and ran for state rep at 27, won 2 terms, state senator resigned, the party asked me to be the senator, had 3 elections for state senate in 8 months. And
I remember that.
Yeah, and I was reelected.
You were part of the John Dolan butterfly effect.
Yes.
He's the Ashton Kutcher of Missouri politics. Because if he wouldn't have resigned, you wouldn't have become a senator. Bob Onder wouldn't have become a rep. If Bob Onder wouldn't have run for Congress, Gatchenberger wouldn't have become a rep.
That's true. Yeah.
It's the wonderful
sounds like
title
baseball.
of the Ashton Kutcher of Missouri politics.
Not him, John Dolan.
Yeah. And John is not that good looking. So.
Well, if we're going to talk a little bit about what you've been up to this session, we should say Joe and I were at the governor's speech at the RCGA this afternoon, and you did get a shout-out for your work on the Second Injury Fund.
Right.
Which I think universally is seen as one of the big successes of session. But knowing from talking with you earlier this session, this was an interesting bill that came together. How did this finally get passed in your view?
And tell us a little bit about the problem that's been existing for a while.
The problem is that you injured workers that already had a pre-existing condition, another injury or whatever. We started this program back in the 1920s, 1930s, and basically if someone had a pre-existing condition or if they had been hurt in the war or something, they weren't most likely going to get hired because if they became totally disabled, the whole disability is on the employer. So they came up with this second injury fund that all the employers voluntarily paid into, and to have a set aside money for someone who was hurt. Well, the problem happened, and with the economy went down, so you had less people with jobs, so you had less people paying in. We had capped the amount of money going into the fund at 3%. And so all of a sudden, and you have high unemployment and things, the fund went bankrupt. It's been bankrupt for 5 years. There's no money to pay injured workers. And so we've tried to fix it, and nobody could get it done. And so finally it got to the point where the Attorney General couldn't settle cases. He had no money. So now we have a backlog of 30,000 cases that are sitting there that need to be adjudicated. And people that have already been awarded money haven't gotten any payments. And so it really was a black eye on the state of Missouri and on business and on labor and on the state, and it needed to be fixed. And finally this year, after 4 or 5 years of trying, we got it done.
So what were some aspects that your bill had that you wanted to point out that changed how the Second Injury Fund worked and also changed the workers' compensation system?
Well, and why were you successful when the last 3 or 4 years has been efforts and they die? What was different this time?
Well, what was different this time is in the past, what I always like to say is, the hall walkers or the lobbyists or the interest groups, they tried to get the perfect bill of that everybody liked. And when you're dealing with this big of a problem, you're never going to make everyone happy. So you get an agreement, and then one group would say, no, we don't like this, and it'd fall apart. And so year after year, it would fall apart, and you could never get it done. So this year, we just said, you know what, we know what you want, and we're going to regain control. We're going to do what the voters elected us to do, is to make tough decisions. So I listened to everybody. I listened to the labor groups. I listened to the trial attorneys. I listened to the business groups and said, what would you like to see? And then we shut the door. And then we got to work. We started figuring out what could we do, what's politically possible. Then we just rolled out a bill, and my colleagues were great. They stood behind me and said, you got to fix. We can get this done. It passed 31-1 out of the Senate or something like that. And so we would have never gotten it through the Senate by, showing our hand early and allowing all the interest groups to go nitpick it, because what happened was it goes down to the other side of the building. It sat there for 2 months while everybody just tearing it apart. We don't like this. We don't like this. And that's what took another 2.5 months to try to get it across the finish line. But really, we just regained control of the process. That is my opinion of why it worked this year and it hadn't in the past.
Okay.
Now, everybody's known that the Second Injury Fund was bankrupt for multiple years, but there was an audit in November or December, sometime this winter, that confirmed it. Do you think that added a lot of pressure, or did it just confirm what everybody?
It just confirmed. I mean, I'm the chair of the Small Business Committee, and we heard this bill every single year, and it became a joke. It was like, well, this year we're really broke, and the next year we were really broke, and then we were we all knew we were broke. That just the interest alone on the payments that we owed people went up $14 million last year. And that was just the interest. So it was as we're getting into a bigger hole.
Are there any other major issues this session that you feel good about that you were involved in?
This one was the biggest one because I think it hit everyone. I mean, it hit every individual worker. It hit everyone. There was a lot of others, successes here and there, but it kind of depends on, what you're interested in, but on an overall encompassing something that affected every Missourian. Every Missourian can get hurt. Every Missourian that's working. This was probably, the biggest thing, that got done.
Okay. Well, now shall we shift to the elephant in the room?
Yes. Let's shift. Well, let's talk a little bit about the school transferring situation. Your district encompasses some of that area, and I was at the Francis Howell meeting that was last week, where there were nearly 3,000 parents there for about 3 hours. Many of them were very upset. One of the school board members toward the end of it, and I don't have the quote in front of me, and I don't have the name of the school board member, but he essentially said there's been a lot of talk about school choice in the previous years, and he says this is school choice. You're looking at it. Do you agree with that sentiment, that this is what it's all about?
Well, I wouldn't say that the situation we're in is school choice. You had a school district that chose and said, if you're not going to come here, then this is the only place you could go. And they picked a place that was 34 miles away that passed up 74 other schools on its way. I firmly believe it was designed so that not that many kids would make that choice.
A lot of people
and when you look at 34 miles, that's if you're the last person to get on the bus and the first person off. So I think when they publish the bus schedules, and you're looking at, okay, am I going to get my fourth grader up at 4:30 in the morning so he can be on the bus for an hour and 30 minutes? I don't see it happening. So that is not school choice. School choice is, I actually have a real choice. I can go here, I can go here, I can go here, I can go here. This is just the place where Normandy picked that they would pay for the transportation to that school.
Now, but when I talked to you about this a couple weeks ago, you were saying, because there was already some state legislators in the House side saying, we're going to have to do something, we're going to have to change the law or something, and you were saying, well, this is how the law is. This is what the law calls for. Do you see a serious effort next session to change the law, or do you think, as far as allowing this type of transfers, or do you think there's something else that should or could be done?
Well, I think some people are going to try to just undo it. They're going to say, well, you can't do that. This law has been on the books for 20-some years, and it was supposed to be the nuclear option that a school district would never let their school get to this point for this to happen, but a lot of the school districts didn't see that as a deterrent. So I think some of the things that should be and will be addressed next year is, can they pass up 74 other viable schools and pick one that is so far away? Should it be should they have the option to do all of them within there? Should it be much more open rather than picking just one or two? So then it doesn't give the incentive to, well, we're going to give you this false sense of an answer, but no one's going to choose it. That, I think, is probably a more viable, option, because if you have all the kids that could go 5 miles away or 10 miles away and things of that nature, then you're not going to have this this big, well, why are they picking this one? Just like, why did Riverview Gardens pick Melville? There's not much capacity. It's far away. Again, I think that was a way to try to deter parents from choosing this option.
Did you watch the coverage of the hearing from Francis Howell last week? And if so, what was kind of your reaction to the reaction of parents there?
It was not surprised. I was not there. I was traveling back from Southwest Missouri, but I had a lot of friends there that were giving me updates. But it was exactly how you knew it would go down. You have a public hearing with people that can come up to the mic with not much information, and they're looking for answers or looking for solutions. And you have the school board wouldn't allow the legislators to speak and say this, but they laid it right at their feet. So it was ugly, and unfortunately, we kind of knew it was going to be that. But I think hopefully, if parents get more information, and once the numbers actually come out, some of the concern will die down.
What sort of fallout have you been hearing as far as your particular stance, or the fact that you seem to be taking a more pragmatic approach? Saying, well, let's see what the numbers are. What sort of fallout have you been getting with parents?
Because it seems the way you're reacting is different from the way Mark Parkinson and Christy Summer are
Correct.
reacting to it.
Yes,
so,
Representative Parkinson has been calling for a special session.
Right. And also they're right in the heart of it. I have 3 other school districts in my district, so I have to take a more of a larger approach to it. But I've been someone all along since my career as a state rep has been very pro school choice, very give parents options. We got to fix these failing school districts. It's only going to get worse, and the more that DESE doesn't do anything, that's just you're failing generation after generation of child. So I think something should be done to give these kids an opportunity to escape a failing school district. Now, should they just be all said, here's a place you can go, no one's going to choose it? Last year, the negotiations on trying to get a Turner fix or something to that broke down from what I had ascertained was due to the school superintendents and their organizations thought they were going to win the lawsuit. So they didn't really need to negotiate because they're like, we're not going to have to deal with this. That didn't work out that way. So I think you're going to have school reform in order to get this done, which is much needed because just the status quo is not working and we're continuing to fail generations of children. And that's not how I want to leave the Senate.
And how hopeful are you that there could be some sort of education reform next session? Because that's asking a lot.
It is asking a lot, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, you look at the education watered-down package that they tried to get through the House that failed, and then they brought it up for later on, and then they kept the board open for 30 minutes trying to get the vote, and it failed again. So I think it's a very big Herculean task, but unfortunately, Jeff Smith, former senator from St. Louis, and I were great friends, very different parties, both very pro-school choice. And when he came in, I was very hopeful for school choice. But it seems in the last several years we've gone backwards on that issue for a variety of different reasons. So I'm very skeptical that something can be done, but I always try to underpromise and overperform. So,
how do you think these schools should be chosen as far as the accredited school that the students who go to the unaccredited school will be bused to?
I think they should have the option to go to any school district that touches their district or within the same county or what have you, or set a mile limit or something, but just give them the choice to go to any one they want.
Now, the governor said today, he reaffirmed what he'd said last week or so, was that he was not going to call a special session. And he said one of the reasons he wasn't was because there needed to be consensus. He said that a special session only works if there's consensus, and he said there obviously isn't consensus. I mean, do you have any thoughts about whether or not there should be a special session or not?
Well, I mean, special sessions are called when you already have the solution.
Right.
That's why a special session is. You don't go up there and try to figure out as you go. It's we have the solution. Let's get it up, go through the processing, and pass it. And I think you're correct. There isn't a solution, because you're with this hitting Francis Howell School District. It's hitting a whole different constituency than it has in the past. It's going to happen in Blue Springs. There's about 14 other school districts that are really close. So it's going to continue to start, becoming a bigger issue across the state. And until that happens, you'll get consensus at that point. But right now, if you're not in St. Charles County, if you're not in Francis Howell, or if you're not in Melville School District, and you're over in Johnson County, you're like, oh, well, how does this affect me?
So you weren't at the meeting, but you said you had some friends there who filled you in. What do you think is at the heart of why all of these why so many parents are so angry and afraid about these incoming students?
No, I think it's probably just fear of the unknown. I think it is fear. Okay, I have a great school district that has had problems in the past, and they've built it up and got their financial footing, and it's doing very well. And what's going to happen? Why did the other school district fail? Was it is it the test scores? Is it the failure of the administration of the school board? So parents just don't know. All they know is their child's education is going to be impacted in some way, shape, or form. Positive, negative. People don't like change. People fear change. And when something is all of a sudden just thrust on them, they don't know. People's initial reaction is to, if they're not up on it, they're down on it. And it's just the fear of the unknown.
Well, we're going to take a quick break while we switch studios, but we will be back. And we're back. Sorry about that short break. We had my coworkers were pounding on the door with pitchforks and fire. We had to get kicked out of the studio and go into a different studio with only 3 mics. But let's pick it up. Jason, I think you had a question or two.
Yeah. We've had Senator Lamping in the studio a few weeks ago, and he talked about how ethics reform for him is going to be a big issue. It might end up being his last year because he seemed to say that he's unsure whether he's going to run for re-election. I wanted to ask you about this issue because I think you have a different perspective than a lot of people who have been calling for ethics reform like him and Senator Lager, is that you actually sponsored a bill this session to cap campaign contribution limits. And my question is, it's twofold. Why did you sponsor that bill? And do you think that any quote-unquote ethics reform is going to be possible without dealing with campaign contribution limits? So it's kind of a two-part question, but
sure.
I wanted to hear your take on
it. Yeah, I did sponsor a bill to cap contribution limits. I voted to remove campaign contribution limits several years ago, biggest regretting vote that I have. Back then, there's no way I anticipated one individual getting a $100,000 check, what's the record? $384,000 check for one person. You just didn't think that was going to happen. I thought, maybe you might get a corporation or something that donates $25,000. Because we were living in an era of $675. So I woefully underestimated the amount of money that has started to flow into the campaigns, and I just don't think it's helped the system. I think it's hurt the system. When you can have a handful of individuals that can just pretty much underwrite one candidate. Why should that candidate reach out and learn about other areas of the state, reach out to different types of people and different types of voters when all they have to do is just make 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people happy in the state. So I think that it looks bad, it smells bad. If someone gives you $500,000 in one check, you're gonna take their call and you're going to listen to what they say, and so human nature takes over. So I just think that it needs to be reined back in just for the integrity of the system, just so it passes the smell test with the voters, because there's enough voter distrust out there of elected officials, and this doesn't help.
Do you think that the legislature can deal with this issue, or is it going to have to probably go through the ballot because there's a lot of Republicans and some Democrats? If you recall, in 2008, Tim Green was a big
Tim Green sponsored the amendment.
But do you think it's going to be through the ballot where this happens, or do you think the legislature can deal with it?
I do not think the legislature will be able to deal with it. I think that the only way the legislature will deal with it is if there is the threat of an initiative petition and the limits are predominantly very low. Yeah. The limits that I put in were something of $5,000 or $10,000 for a state senator, $5,000 for a state rep, and I think $25,000 for a statewide official. So I had some pretty large limits to campaigns are expensive, but I think if an initiative petition comes in, it'll be much lower than that. So the only way that the legislature would want to act would be out of, oh my gosh, if we don't do something preemptive, then there's an initiative petition that's probably going to bring it into much lower limits.
20 years ago, that actually is what happened, because the only reason we got the campaign donation limits to begin with was that there was an initiative petition to get limits on there, and then in fact the legislature approved something. Then there was lower limits that were approved at the polls, and that's what subsequent led to years and years and years of litigation. But I always thought it was interesting because now Senator Roy Blunt was actually one of the leaders of the original effort to get campaign donation limits, and it was his son who signed the law to get rid of them.
Yeah, and it is something that that if an initiative petition comes out, it's going to be extremely hard to beat. It'll pass with 75% of the vote. I think the people want campaign finance limits. You can make the argument that it's my individual freedom. I can give whatever I want. And I listened to that argument and I voted that way. Back in 2007 or 8 or whatever it was. But I think that the way it's playing out is not in the best interest of the public.
Now the question that I always ask proponents of campaign finance limits is, can they work? Because we've seen in federal elections, the super PACs basically rendered federal limits useless. In the inter period between 2006 and 2007, you saw committees being used to basically go around it. Koster was a great example of that. So is there a way to craft a system where people don't use those subterfuges, or is it just a situation where it might not be the best solution, but it's better than what we have, essentially?
There's ways. I mean, obviously, if you just put the limits on, people will create 500 different committees and then funnel money. But if you block the transfer between committees, that makes a huge issue. But then also what you need to do is you need to make sure there can only be one treasurer at one mailing address and not allow P.O. boxes. To be used, so that it would keep, John Smith from being the treasurer of 400, campaign, committees all at one P.O. box, and then it's just easy to move it around. But if I actually really had to do the work to have a separate committee, have a separate treasurer, have a separate mailing address, and do it right now, it's just so easy. It's just shuffling paper around. So you need to put some steps in there to make it more difficult. People will get around it. There's no way you can probably stop it, but at least you can make it very difficult rather than just, I'm going to hire you for $30,000 a year salary to be the treasurer of all these 400 campaigns and just make everything work out mathematically.
Which groups would be willing, though, to do an initiative petition drive? The state Democratic Party made it, quote, an issue a couple of years ago, but then they didn't follow through. I mean, they just kind of put it out there saying, we support this, but then they didn't fund it. Is there any groups that you're aware of who are willing to actually get out on the streets and get these signatures?
Not that I'm aware of. Or there might be some groups that want it, but they would have the financial wherewithal to get the people out and get the message out. But as of right now, I don't know of any. It's going to take a well-funded group or somebody to get into that mode, to get behind it, to get it on the ballot.
So, kind of switching gears a little bit more generally, this next year will be your last year in the Missouri Senate. As I was kind of mentioning before, even though you were only 39 years old, you are the most senior member of the Missouri Senate because you came in a special election in 2006. Again, kind of a two-part question. What are kind of the things you want to do in your so-called swan song, basically, and kind of just give a sense of what your experience has been like in the Missouri legislature? You probably had a much more fast-paced ride through it than most people. So, I'd like to hear your take on both of those things.
It's been a fantastic, amazing experience. So I'm not looking next year to do anything huge. We've done a lot of big things. We wrote all the illegal immigration law back for the state in 2008, which there wasn't a bigger issue. It was on TV every single night. We handled that. We did all the cyber stalking, issues after the Megan Meyer, case. We did the autism insurance reform. I handled the redistricting for the congressional committees, and then this past year we did second injury fund and workers' compensation overhaul. So we've had huge successes on big ticket bills. So I don't know what else big that I could, that I think has a chance of passing. I will do the campaign finance reform, but I don't think it'll pass. Things that are dear to my heart are helping kids with developmental disabilities, trying to make sure that they have employment opportunities after they get out of the school system, and continuing down that line. But for when I started at 27 to 39 years old, it's been a fantastic, amazing experience that I've really been blessed with, been able to get to do. And I highly recommend anybody that has an interest, they definitely should get involved because it's amazing.
And I was going to bring that up. It's like there are people in the Missouri Senate who filibuster all the time and play quote-unquote defense, and there seems to be a select few who actually handle big pieces of legislation. I would put you in that category, not to suck up to you while you're in front of me, but I think as you kind of mentioned, that has been kind of your role in the Missouri Senate. Has that been something that you've relished, or has it been a frustrating, horrible experience carrying all these big ticket bills. Like, how has that been for you?
No, I took the viewpoint of, if I'm going to be here, if I'm going to be away from my family for 4 nights a week, for 5 months out of the year, I'm going to do something big, and I'm going to change, the state, and for the better. So I've wanted to make those big types of changes. The difficult part has been that I'm somebody that I always think you're going to get rewarded for hard work and doing a good job, and being able to craft great laws, change people's lives on the state level doesn't necessarily correlate into political success where fundraising and being out in times. And so that's been probably the biggest thing is wow, the hard work and the success doesn't always correlate into political success. But when I look back and tell my kids what we've been able to do, I cherish that role. It's too easy to stand up and say no to everything, but try to get people out of 34 egos to get in the room and craft something together and then call it a good piece of legislation that actually works. That's a much bigger accomplishment.
You chaired the special committee in 2011 that was dealing with some of the Medicaid proposals, the healthcare exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
You were doing those hearings around the state. As you know, nothing happened. Do you think anything will happen in your last year, or do you think that's kind of a dead issue?
I still don't see it happening. I don't think with the personalities that are there, unless there is some type of massive reform bill that can come together, that can bring people along. I just don't see how, if it's just expansion of Medicaid, if it's just putting together a health insurance exchange, which we're not going to do as a state, it's already passed. I don't see that happening. It's going to have to be a pretty intensive reform bill to sweeten the pot to get enough people to go along.
Is one of the problems, I hate to single out one person, but this has been my theory for a long time, is that now that Senator Schaaf is there and he's making demands that any Medicaid expansion be paired with getting rid of the certificate of need process, which causes the licensing of hospitals, is that going to be like an insurmountable barrier to doing anything? Because he's used that similar argument to kill smaller Medicaid expansions in the past when he was in the House. Is that a major concern of a lot of people in the Senate, that may happen, or is that just kind of a tertiary issue?
It's a tertiary. I mean, I think CON, there's enough people that would say, let's just get rid of it. I mean, wow, if I got to go to a committee so I can buy a $1 million MRI piece of equipment or something like that nature, is it there? I mean, is it useful? Do other states don't have it? So, I mean, I don't think that's a big issue. It is for Senator Schaaf. It's a huge issue for him. But to tie it, to get rid of it, yeah, you're going to get some groups that don't like it, but there's so many pieces of any type of reform that they wouldn't like. I don't see that being the linchpin that makes something happen or not happen.
Quickly, what is your plans after you're out? I mean, you tried running for Secretary of State in 2012. That didn't work out. Lost in the primary. Are there other offices that you may be looking at? May you make another run for that or something else? What are your thoughts?
I had a blast running for Secretary of State. It was fun. It was, I set goals for my life, and one of them was to run for statewide office, and I did it. It was fun traveling the state, meeting people, giving talks, and I've done that. I really doubt that I would be doing that again. Obviously, you get out of the game for 4 years. It's hard to get back in, especially in the era of the campaign limit or finance no limits and things of that nature. It's very tough. I've been approached for several various different types of offices to run for next year or in the future, but I have made no decision. The one piece of advice I was given from other people that had lost primaries and elections statewide is don't make any decisions for a year. You're still working through the process of working so hard and not winning and the emotional drain, and then just reconnecting with the family and everything. And so just make sure you decompress and then look at it. So we'll be making some decisions in March, when filing does come around. And other than that, I do have 5 kids. They're 11, 10, 7, and 7. And I like coaching basketball. I like going to the baseball games and playing with them. And my wife would want nothing more than me to be home every night. So if we did do anything, it would be on a county level. And if not, we'd be happy to hang up our political hat and had 13 great years and a lot of memories and successes and move on.
Well, that should just about do it for us on the show here today. You can read all of my stories at stlpublicradio.org. You can read all of Joe and Jason's stories at stlbeacon.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @CSMcDaniel. You can follow Joe on Twitter at jmannies, JMANNIES, and you can follow Jason on Twitter at jrosenbaum.
You can follow Scott Rupp on Twitter at
there you go.
Scott_Rupp.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Until then, so long.
Great. Thanks for having me.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.